Let's start. So today we're talking about Iran, Venezuela, and Iran. We'll start with Venezuela, and the title is "The Long and Treacherous Road Back to Democracy." Um, as you may know, at least most of you may know, I have spent a lot of time in my career with a big focus on Venezuela. My wife is from Venezuela. Her huge extended family is all from Venezuela. And not only that, while I worked on Wall Street for some of those years, I also was doing some work with the CIA that covered about 7 years with a particular focus on Venezuela. So it's a country that I know very well. Um, I have met with uh, several Venezuelan presidents over the course of my career, high level politicians, finance ministers, central bankers, um, people in the military, all the names that you may be hearing in the news, people like Delcy Rodriguez, Diosdado Cabello, Nicolas Maduro. I know all of them. I've sat at in extensive meetings with them many, many times. Um, why did I have this type of access? Because I was managing a lot of money, representing large U.S. financial institutions, and that gives you tremendous access. And of course, they didn't know I was also doing work with the CIA, but they wanted they wanted investment, so they had a big interest to meet with me. So it's quite shocking, to see everything unfold now, and all these players. I know them, and I knew them, reasonably well. So the names we're going to talk about, these are people I know firsthand. Let's begin by saying that most of the analysis you see in the U.S. media on Venezuela is quite poor, misleading, in many cases inaccurate. So I hope that today's class clarifies and puts the situation in proper perspective. And I hope you walk away with a deeper understanding. So let's begin. Let's go back to Saturday evening when Trump addressed the nation. Trump addressed the United States to explain why the United States decided to extract President Maduro, the dictator of Venezuela, out of Venezuela and bring him to New York, where he will eventually face trial. Um, Trump talked. Oh, by the way, let me just back up and say, I hope none of you were surprised. Maybe surprised as I was by the way they did it, by the unbelievable precision of our U.S. military. All of that is just astonishing and shocking. But the fact that Maduro was removed from office, I hope no one was surprised by that. This is something that I've been telling you is going to happen since August, when the United States first moved a battleship off the coast of Venezuela. I was quite sure that Maduro's life as dictator of Venezuela was going to be short-lived from that point on. But just going back, Trump talks about narco trafficking as perhaps the biggest reason why he removed Maduro from office. He talks about oil. And of course, if you read the media, many people think that that was the sole reason. We want access to Venezuela's oil. Um, and then, restoration of democracy, could that be a reason? Trump doesn't talk about that really at all. The most important reason, and I would actually say the sole reason, truly the sole reason, and this is something that Trump doesn't mention at all, for I think a good reason. He doesn't want people to know why he did this. He doesn't want the world to know why he did this. Trump prefers ambiguity and confusion. But the real reason why Trump removed Maduro from Venezuela and why he wants to continue to shake things up is he wants to combat China, Russian, and Iranian influence in our backyard and to weaken the China, Russian, and Iranian alliance. That is the true reason for the action that Trump took over the weekend. Now, if we look back to a few weeks ago, we discussed the Trump administration's national security document that it released about 6 weeks ago. In that document, there's something that was labeled the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine began in 1823 under President James Monroe. And the Monroe Doctrine was a warning to European countries that they should stay out of the Americas, and they should leave the Western Hemisphere to U.S. influence. No one else should step foot in the Western Hemisphere. And in the national security document, again, that was published roughly 6, 7 weeks ago, Trump basically reiterated the Monroe Doctrine and basically is sending a message to the Russians, to the Iranians, to the Chinese, stay out of our hemisphere. And now this is being called, instead of the Monroe Doctrine, the Don-Roe Doctrine, right? Donald Trump, the Don-Roe Doctrine. And this really is the primary reason. It's not so much for oil. We have plenty of oil. We do not need Venezuelan oil. As we know, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. But we don't need Venezuelan oil, but we don't want Venezuela to be supplying their oil primarily to China and to Cuba, which is where all of Venezuela's oil exports go. They go to our enemies. So we want that to come to an end. So again, the first part of Trump's speech was, why did we do it? And he said we did it to stop narco trafficking and oil. And what I'm telling you is those aren't the real reasons. The real reason is to get Russian, Chinese, and Iranian influence out of our hemisphere and to stop Venezuela from supplying a precious resource to China and to Cuba. Those are the two real reasons. The narco trafficking, mostly an excuse. The other interesting message that Trump sent on Saturday night, he said, we are running Venezuela now. The United States is running Venezuela now. And the other interesting thing he said is, and this relates to Maria Corina Machado, who is the main opposition leader of Venezuela. She's the one who, is by far the most popular political leader in the country. And if there were elections held today, she would win in a landslide. I'm going to quote you what Trump said about her. He said, I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect. So these two comments really sort of around Latin America and certainly within Venezuela and among Venezuelans living in the United States, this message was a shock and a huge disappointment. What do you mean the United States is running Venezuela? And how could you possibly say that Maria Corina Machado doesn't have the support or the respect within the country to be the leader of the country when she clearly would win overwhelmingly in an election? And in fact, there was an election back in July of 2024. She was banned from running by the dictatorship, so she was disallowed from running. So she chose an unknown person to run in her place. And because she backed him, he won in a landslide. Okay. So, how could Trump possibly say this? Now, we know that Trump is often sloppy with his words. Sometimes he's ambiguous intentionally, sometimes he's ambiguous unintentionally. But overall, he just tends to be quite sloppy. And he can say things, as we all know, in a very offensive fashion. Offensive meaning he offends us, not that he's necessarily aggressive, but he offends us. Marco Rubio, a few days later, or a day later, on the Sunday news programs, was far more articulate, and he added nuance to Trump's words. But still, the question of who will lead Venezuela going forward remained very unclear. So let's explain what's going on here. Let me just give you a brief piece of history. Chavez, Hugo Chavez, was elected democratically in 1998. He took office in 1999, in January of 1999, and he held office from 1999 until 2013, when he died of cancer. During that 14-year stretch, which after 2003, it turned into a dictatorship. In 2004, Chavez stole an election. That was the first time he actually stole an election. And he really uprooted the institutions of Venezuela from that point forward very, very aggressively. So we can say from 2004 on, Venezuela has been a dictatorship. But during the Chavez years, Venezuela was a one-man show. Chavez had absolute control over the military, over the judicial system, over the puppet Congress. He controlled everything. He controlled the oil industry. But after Chavez died in 2013, the country began, the leadership, I should say, the rule of the country began to splinter in 5 separate silos. Nicolas Maduro, who was at the time of Chavez's death, was the vice president, and he assumed the presidency. He became the dictator of Venezuela. But he didn't have the charisma, he didn't have the power, he didn't have the gravitas, I suppose, to maintain rule with an iron hand the way Chavez did. So power fractured among 5 key players. And it's not that that happened overnight, it took time. But over time, those 5 key players became Delcy Rodriguez, who became the vice president of the country, and now with Maduro's removal, she's now the president. Her brother, Jorge Rodriguez, and the two of them, they do have different roles. They do have slightly different spheres of influence, but they work fairly closely together. So that's 2. Then you have Diosdado Cabello. And of all the people I mentioned here, he might be the most important. He controlled the oil industry. He controlled the spy network. He had the closest ties to to Cuba, and through Cuba, Cuba plays Cuban personnel really is the core of Venezuela's spy network. Diosdado Cabello controls the various paramilitary groups that instill fear throughout the country. And then finally, you have the head of the armed forces, the head of the military, and his name is Vladimir Padrino Lopez. Okay? He too interfaces with Cuba, Cuban intelligence, and he is most directly has the strongest relationships with Russia, although Diosdado Cabello also has fairly strong connections to Russia. So again, these 5 individuals controlled the country. They shared power. They shared decision making. They even competed with one another. And it was Maduro, Nicolas Maduro, who was the coordinator of these individuals. So again, together they controlled Congress, they controlled the courts, they controlled the military, they controlled the paramilitary groups, they controlled the oil industry. From top to bottom, these 5 people controlled the country. Now, let's go back to Trump's speech. When he said, "We are controlling the country." How could the United States possibly control the country? Okay, so keep that in mind. I'm not going to answer that quite yet. How could the United States control this country? Now let's go to the second question. Trump saying that Maria Corina Machado did not have the popularity to be president of the country right now, when she clearly does have the popularity. She is the only leader in Venezuela who has any popularity at all. She's it. There's no possible democratically elected president other than her. She's everything. She represents really, truly the desires of the Venezuelan people right now. So how could Trump say something that is so off the mark? Because Trump is speaking vaguely, ambiguously. Whether it's purposeful or not purposeful is impossible to know. But he was not precise with his language. Let's be precise with what's going on and what the truth is. These individuals that I mentioned have total control over the country, and most importantly, control over the military. Vladimir Padrino has total control of the military, and Diosdado Cabello has control over the spy apparatus and the paramilitary groups. So how could you fly in Maria Corina Machado, who's popular among the people, and put her on top of this messy situation? There is zero chance she would have the loyalty of the military. There's zero chance she would have the loyalty of the paramilitary groups, of all these different mafias that are dispersed among these other individuals. Right? Best case scenario, it would just be absolutely chaotic, and there might be a coup against her. That's sort of the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that she could be killed within days. So there's no chance that the Trump administration would put her into this mess like that to serve as president, or even to be able to hold elections, because elections can't be held right now. If you were to hold elections, who is there to ensure that these elections would be free and fair? Right? It's an impossible task at the moment. In fact, this was not just Trump making this decision alone. This was not Marco Rubio making the decision alone. We know that the CIA provided the Trump and Marco Rubio an extensive report saying that Maria Corina Machado could not manage the situation. And it would put her at grave risk and put the country at grave risk to impose her at this situation as at this moment as president. So yes, I know people who care deeply about Venezuela are suffering right now because they believe that the Trump administration perhaps sold the Venezuelan people out, that he's making an alliance with a dictatorship, right? You remove Maduro and you just replace Maduro with this new president, um, and she's just going to be another Maduro, and she's controlled by Diosdado Cabello. So what was really accomplished, right? The conventional wisdom among many people is that nothing was accomplished. Delcy Rodriguez, her brother Jorge, Diosdado Cabello, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, they are simply another Maduro. Now let's go back to the question, why did Trump say we control the country? We're running Venezuela. Because the Trump administration believes that now that they've captured Maduro, they have enormous leverage. And they have instilled great fear into these. They've gotten Maduro out. These four other individuals are operating under extreme fear because they could be next. If they do not cooperate with the Trump administration, they could easily be killed or captured. And in Trump's mind, that gives us enormous influence, enormous leverage, and therefore, in the words of Trump, control. Now, it doesn't mean that the United States controls all the different events that are going on in the country, right? There's many things that are going on that are very much going against what the United States would like to see. I'll get to that in a moment. But on the big picture issues, the things that Trump really cares about, he believes that we have, if not total control, at least massive influence. Because these individuals know that they can be in huge trouble if they don't comply. Now, what are Trump's objectives? What are his objectives? Well, they've been stated pretty clearly. Objective number one is the U.S. will be the only country that assists Venezuela in oil extraction. It will be U.S. oil companies that get all the deals to extract oil from Venezuela, right? It won't be Chinese companies. It won't be Russian companies. It won't be European companies. It will only be U.S. oil companies. And by the way, that's why you saw yesterday all the U.S. oil producers jump sharply because they will have no competition from any other countries in the world. Secondly, the second goal, the second near-term objective, all foreign actors should be kicked out of Venezuela. So the Venezuelan government needs to kick all foreign actors out of Venezuela ASAP. That means the Chinese are out. That means the Iranians are out. That means the Russians are out. And that means the Cubans are out. Now, remember, I mentioned that the spy networks are run by Cubans, essentially. In fact, the day that Maduro was captured, he had 140 Cubans protecting him. Obviously, they failed massively in their job. Many of those who were on Maduro's security detail were killed in that operation. But there's still a lot of Cubans, a lot of Cuban intelligence in Venezuela right now. They all need to be removed. That's the second objective. And the third objective is to end the Venezuelan leadership to end all narco trafficking. Now, none of this says anything about restoration of democracy, right? Trump did not mention that as one of the goals. Does that mean that that is not an objective of the Trump administration? I am quite confident that the Trump administration has as a key objective to restore democracy to Venezuela. Why am I so confident about that? Because even if you assume that Trump's ambitions are totally selfish, meaning he'd be willing to make a deal with a dictator as long as the dictator allows U.S. oil companies to extract oil from Venezuela and they can, make their money. Even if you believe Trump's objectives are totally narrow, totally selfish, it is still in the Trump administration's interest to get democracy back to Venezuela because no oil company is going to invest serious money without the promise or at least a high likelihood of long-term stability in Venezuela. And there is no way to achieve long-term stability in Venezuela if you have this cast of characters running the country or any dictatorship running the country for any protracted period of time. Without rule of law, without enforceable contracts, no oil company is going to set up shop for the long run. They need security, they need guarantees, they need rule of law, they need a proper judicial system to enforce contracts. If it's a dictatorship, any dictator can come in and change his mind and seize the oil fields again, like like they did in the past under Chavez. Now, earlier today, shortly before this call began, Marco Rubio was interviewed. And he mentioned a three-stage process. A three-stage process. And this supports my view that the Trump administration wants restoration of democracy in Venezuela. The three-step process includes, number one, stabilization of the situation. And that's what they believe they're doing now. Stabilization meaning we just plucked the leader out of the country. There's a real risk that the country could descend into chaos. We could have coups and counter coups. We could have the paramilitary forces running rampant and start shooting at opposition figures. The United States is trying to prevent that. They are trying to stabilize the situation. They believe that Delcy Rodriguez and her brother Jorge Rodriguez are the most pragmatic of these four other leaders that I mentioned. Now, when I say pragmatic, I don't mean pragmatic like you and I are pragmatic. I mean pragmatic in the context of radical people, communists, dictators, of the people we're dealing with. It's the Rodriguez siblings that the Trump administration believes they're most able to negotiate with, most able to deal with. And that's why Delcy was chosen to be the one as president. Now, why is the Trump administration picking Delcy Rodriguez? Why her? What is it they know about her? Well, obviously, the CIA has done their homework. They know her personality. They know her character traits. They know her behaviors. So she was chosen for that reason. A lot of historical analysis on her. Additionally, I don't know this for a fact, but it's believed that there had to have been a mole inside of the administration. For this strike on Maduro to extract him, someone very close to him had to be feeding the CIA information of his movements, every single movement, where he was, his location. The CIA was constantly informed. For someone to have access to that type of information, they had to have been very, very close to Maduro, right? Very, very close. And it's believed that it was Delcy Rodriguez who was the key informant. Not that she was the only informant, I'm sure they had several, but she was likely one of them. And therefore, there's been a trust gained between the Trump administration and Delcy. Now, it's not that she's a good person. It's not that she is a sympathizer or had anything against the Maduro administration. I'm sure she was offered some enticements as well as some serious threats. So she cut a deal for her own self-interest. And her brother, Jorge Rodriguez, was probably in it as well. So that's why she was probably chosen as president for the time being. So that's stabilization. That's the first phase that Marco Rubio spoke about. The second phase he mentioned is reconciliation. What does he mean by reconciliation? That might not be the best word to describe what they have in mind, but that's the word he used. They want to rebuild society. Rebuild society. They want all these political prisoners that are in jails, in torture chambers, to be released. They want people to come out of their homes and not be fearful that they're going to be arrested. They want organizations to be revived, church groups and clubs. They want society to bounce back. It's been repressed for so many years, for decades. They want people to be able to breathe again and organizations to flourish once again. Only then will the country be ready to have an election. Also, as part of that, rebuilding civil society, reconciliation, institutions need to be rebuilt. You need an electoral council that is can be relied on to count votes reliably, right? You don't have that right now. The institutions in Venezuela, the only thing they are capable of doing is committing fraud in favor of the government. As part of reconciliation, the military needs to be somewhat reprofessionalized. So it's not totally loyal to Vladimir Padrino Lopez and Diosdado Cabello. These things need to be addressed. If they're not addressed before you have an election, you could have an election. Maria Corina Machado could be elected president in 2 or 3 months, and immediately you have a coup on your hands. So you need a more professional military that's willing to allow elections to go forward without fraud and without a coup shortly thereafter. So Marco Rubio, so that's reconciliation. And then the final point he mentioned is transition. Transition to democracy. That means elections. Now, he didn't give a timeline for how quickly these will take place. I wouldn't be shocked if we have an election by the end of 2026 or the first half of 2027, but it depends on how things are going. As you can see, this is a very delicate, difficult, dangerous moment, but a key moment. And so much rides on it. So much rides on it. Marco Rubio, personally, because he's got his fingerprints all over it, he needs this to be a success. The Trump administration, this was an incredibly bold operation. He needs to make sure this is a success. They don't want to put U.S. boots on the ground. So this needs to be done through making threats and offering rewards to these 4 key players that I mentioned. And it's not only these 4. You can be certain that the Trump administration, the CIA, the State Department, they are reaching out to people throughout the Venezuelan bureaucracy, lower levels of the military, lower levels of the, in Congress, throughout all the different administrative apparatuses of Venezuela, offering them carrots and sticks. If you cooperate, no damage will be done to you. And maybe there's a reward in there for you in certain cases. But if you don't cooperate with the United States, you will be punished severely. We'll either take you to be tried in the United States, or maybe you'll be killed. So this is all about enticements and threats. And the more credible the U.S. has in making its threats and its enticements, the better it will work. Now, does the United States have leverage on Venezuela? You better believe it. And the leverage is oil, right? We continue to intercept oil boats. Venezuela has no ability to generate revenues whatsoever without oil. So for this government to function at all, they need oil. And the United States has taken all access, oil access away from them. In fact, the United States is now the one in charge of collecting the oil revenues and dispersing it as it sees fit to Venezuela. So this is all about the enticements and the punishments the United States can dole out. Now, just to show you what a dangerous game it is, Delcy Rodriguez and her brother Jorge, let's call those two the pragmatists. They're the ones who are most likely to cooperate. They're most rational. Then you have Vladimir Padrino Lopez, who's the one who's in charge of the armed forces. Just so you know, in the first Trump administration, Trump attempted to gain cooperation from Vladimir Padrino Lopez. Trump thought he had a deal with him. I'm not sure exactly what Lopez was going to do. Maybe a coup attempt against Maduro. It's not crystal clear, but Lopez backed out at the last minute. And because of that, because Lopez backed out at the last minute, the Trump administration didn't include him in their plans this time around. But the fact that he contemplated striking a deal with the Trump administration 4 years ago, the Trump administration believes that he might be someone who could cooperate. The most dangerous of the four is Diosdado Cabello. Again, he controls the paramilitary groups, he controls the spy network, and he is believed to be the most radical ideologically. And I can tell you from my personal experience, having met with him many times, I concur with that view completely. He is the most radical. He grew up with Chavez in the military. They've known each other since the late 80s. He is a diehard believer in the anti-American communist dictatorship authoritarian cause. He is the one that the United States is most concerned about. If there's one that might attempt to lead a coup attempt against Delcy Rodriguez to overthrow her and go against U.S. interests, he's the one to watch for. Now, I'm sure he's been told your best case scenario, if you try anything, is we'll extract you the way we extracted Maduro. But more likely you'll die. I'm sure those threats have been made. But he is the one that the United States is most concerned about. So, in my opinion, the United States is playing this properly. I would have loved to have seen a president, Maria Corina Machado, installed. You know, she should be. Her candidate won the election. Edmundo Gonzalez won the election in 2024. He could be president. She could be vice president. But it is just not a feasible strategy, right? It would be basically sacrificing her She can be a great leader of Venezuela. She can be one of the greatest leaders in Latin America, but now is not the moment. Now is not the moment. Okay. Let's move on to Iran, and I'll try to cover Iran more quickly. I do want to cover it because it's very important. Let's set the stage for, you all know that there's big protests going on, and every hour they seem to grow, and they have spread throughout the country. Not only have they spread throughout the country, but actually some security forces have joined the protesters. This is a first. Let's give some history. Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, is the longest standing dictator in the world. He has been in power since 1989. The Iranian Islamic dictatorship has been in power since 1979. The first Ayatollah served for 10 years, and then he died. And when he died in 1989, so he took power in 1979, the first Ayatollah, he died, and the current Ayatollah, the current leader, took power then. Now, let me say that not all dictatorships are the same. Both Iran and Venezuela are what are called revolutionary dictatorships. Now, what's the difference between a revolutionary dictatorship and just a regular generic dictatorship? A regular generic dictatorship definitely does not have like a strong ideology behind it, right? If the classic Latin American dictatorships were not communist, they weren't capitalists, they were just dictatorships for the purpose of maintaining control. Revolutionary dictatorships are driven by a strong ideology. And that strong ideology is the leaders of the revolution infuse this ideology into society. Society is educated with this ideology, and it penetrates the school system. It penetrates the radio stations, the TV stations. You're fed this ideology 24/7. And these revolutionary dictatorships that are infused with ideology, they have much more staying power than your typical generic dictatorship. Right? The ideology gives the regime staying power because it creates true believers in the cause. So the Venezuelan dictatorship is a communist or socialist ideology, and anti-imperialist, that is anti-United States. That's been a huge source of strength for Venezuela. In Iran, it's also anti-imperialist, that is anti-Western, anti-American, anti-Israel. And just as important as its anti-imperialist ideology is its Islamist ideology, right? Religion penetrates society deeply. Now, so yes, Venezuela and Iran, they're both highly repressive. There's no freedom of speech. Education is tightly controlled. Ideology is infused throughout the society. But Iran takes it to a different level. Because not only is it a ideological dictatorship, it's also totalitarian from a social standpoint. In Iran, the regime determines what clothes women can wear. The clothing she wears. She has to cover her hair. Women have to cover their hair. Alcohol is forbidden. Certain foods are forbidden. Stores cannot sell certain types of foods. You will be jailed if you sell alcohol or certain types of foods or certain types of clothing. You will be jailed and tortured. Now, because the dictatorship in Iran is so pervasive, the people have even more grievances than they do in a dictatorship like Venezuela. Because in Venezuela, you could still go to a bar and order a drink. You can still get beer for your home, right? These are things you can do. A woman doesn't have to cover her hair. But in Iran, everything is punishable by jail or death. And that creates room for more grievance. Now, when the first Ayatollah seized power in 1979, he made huge promises to the population. He promised an economic and political utopia. Truly economic and political utopia. And the regime has not only failed to deliver, but it has been complete hell. Instead of utopia, they've brought economic collapse. The currency is in a downward spiral. Inflation is reported at 40%, but it's much, much higher because the Iranians lie about their statistics. There are severe water shortages throughout the country, severe water shortages. Instead of spending their oil money on education, on roads, on infrastructure, all the money has gone out of the country to fund international terrorism, to fund Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. For what? Right? To create a hell within the Iranian society. Now, Iran is a theocracy. A theocracy meaning the government claims that the government represents Allah's will, God's will. When you have a leadership, a government that claims to represent God's will, and instead the regime engages in massive corruption, massive mismanagement, murder, repression, the regime becomes even more insulting and more grotesque to the population because you claim you represent God. And instead of bringing holiness, you bring hell. So we're at the point, and we've been at the point for some time now, that the Islamist government, it can no longer sell Islamist ideology to the population. The population has had it. Women have been ripping off their head coverings for years. People have been protesting on and off for years. But something changed. Something changed in Iran in June of 2025. What changed? The 12-day war with Israel. With the 12-day war, the regime completely lost its story of being invulnerable and all-powerful. So not only were its missile defense systems completely ineffective, right? Israel shot them down very quickly. But the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, went into hiding. And he demonstrated to the Iranian population that he's nothing more than a coward. In the 12-day war, in one evening, in a matter of hours, 24 of Iran's top military commanders were killed. They were killed either in their bunkers or in their bedrooms. It was crystal clear after weeks that Israel had infiltrated the Iranian regime pretty completely. So the Iranian population sensed that the Iranian regime was vulnerable. Not only had it lost credibility and legitimacy, that had happened years ago, but for the first time, the Iranian population sensed the regime is vulnerable. Now, let me say something about the supreme leader, Khamenei. He's 86 years old. He turns 87 later this year. And he's widely rumored to be in not good health. Clearly, this guy who went into hiding, he's not equipped to be the leader of Iran. and he's vulnerable. So, yes, these uprisings have been growing and growing. Now, as I said, there have been uprisings in the past, but this one does seem to be different. Number one, it's all throughout the country. It's not concentrated in certain cities, it's everywhere. I mentioned that the security, certain parts of Iran's small parts, but some parts of the security establishment have actually joined the protesters. Now, in past years, protesters have chanted for free elections. They've chanted for more equal rights for women. They've chanted for women to be able to take off their head coverings. They've chanted for a better economy. This time they're chanting something different. They're chanting death to the Ayatollah, death to the regime. That's new. The other thing that's new is those protesting historically have been young people, only women in some cases, or in other cases only students, depending on the year. This time around, the protesters, the people themselves, range from men to women, young to old, and most importantly, the middle class merchants have joined the protesters. Middle class merchants who represent the backbone of the Iranian economy, the fragile Iranian economy. But if there is a part of the economy that's functioning, it's the merchant class, the business class. They are joining the protests. This is brand new. So what to look for? Well, what to look for is, will the protests continue to grow? Just overnight, they seem to have grown. The second thing to look for is, will the IRGC is the elite repressive military apparatus of Iran, will they remain cohesive? That's an open question. The security units that have joined the protests do not come from the IRGC. They're local police forces. That's different. The question is, will the IRGC remain cohesive? Now, if we do see a crack in the regime, we do see a fall in the regime, and I don't expect that to happen in the coming days, but anything is possible. But we're not likely to see a quick transition to democracy. It will move in stages, like we're seeing in Venezuela. It will go in stages. And the first stage might be a new dictatorship. But what I'm quite confident this time around is the new dictatorship, whoever is the new leader of Iran, they won't have a turban on their head. That is, it will look much more secular. And they won't want isolation. They will want to reach out to the United States. They will want a better relationship with the world. That's based on a lot of reading I've done, a lot of interviews I've listened to with Iranian specialists. The Islamism in Iran, at least from a social standpoint, it's over. It's dead. Most Iranians want to lead their lives as secular people, not only not as Muslims, but certainly not as diehard Muslims. In the meantime, we're likely to see repression grow, right, in Iran. And a big question now is, if we do see an intensification of repression, if we do see the IRGC began to murder people in mass on the streets, what's the response? What will be the response? Will the people run home, go back into hiding, or is this it? Has the population decided this must be the end? So the coming days and weeks in Iran and in Venezuela are going to be pivotal. I am quite optimistic about the outcome in Venezuela, although the risks remain high and the timeline is uncertain. In Iran, long term, I'm optimistic. What the next days and weeks look like, I think, are highly uncertain. Again, it depends on the commitment of the people and can the Ayatollah count on the IRGC to really crush these uprisings? Or is the IRGC going to take a softer hand than it has in the past? Those are critical questions going forward. So let's see if anyone has any comments or questions.